Patrick, it is just great to have you on again. We've got some very exciting news that's going to go conflict with what many people have been reading in the newspapers or seeing online about the latest anti-amyloid drug. What's the story there? Is it really a good option, a bad option? What's the story?
I mean, it's a bad option. The first thing we have to know is there have been 40 trials now on amyloid drugs that are actually almost closest to a vaccine in the sense that they're injecting anti-amyloid antibodies. And amyloid accumulates inside neuronal connections. So it's a bit like, tackling arthritis by trying to deal with the scars. And of those studies where the data has been disclosed, which I think is 15 now, it's clear that they have absolutely no clinical effect at all. Now, what happened last year, you may remember, is that the FDA seemed to sort of conditionally approve a drug called
aducanumab, yeah,
exactly.
Which is it's the same company, isn't it? Because
it's
lecanemab is the same, and it's also an anti-amyloid antibody drug, so same family of drug. Yeah,
totally the same family. And what happened is they didn't have enough clinical significance. Basically, what you measure is the clinical dementia rating. In effect, that's what a doctor would use to diagnose dementia. And it's an 18-point scale. And on the previous drug, they got a 0.39 point drop. In other words, less than half a question. So,
but they got statistical significance. Well, they did, or did they not? They did on the last drug, but they have on this one. Yeah.
But this one has gone up to 0.45. In other words, less than half a point out of an 18-point scale. And of course, because it's a big study, I mean, the more people you have in the study, the more you can find statistical significance. And they just got statistical significance. Now, I mean, to put this into context, when Professor David Smith gave people B vitamins, he got 65% of the trial's participants 1 year later had reduced their clinical dementia rating to 0. Okay.
So on using the same metric, we use clinical dementia rating. What's the difference?
Exactly, the same rating, exactly. So we're talking many point drop. In a recent study on omega-3s, the drop was 1.5 points. So in other words, we're looking at more than 3 times as effective as this drug. And also, in a sense, that's kind of important, the clinical dementia rating. But we also have to look at the rate of brain shrinkage. And the best drug in this class has reduced total brain shrinkage over the period of a trial, which is normally a year, by 2%. Professor David Smith's group, on the other hand, have shown with B vitamins, especially in those people who have sufficient omega-3, 73% less shrinkage. So it's like chalk and cheese.
Two other really key points for people are going to be, at what stage do you administer either the drugs or the nutrients? Because I believe the drugs are all for early treatment, so early diagnosis, early treatment. And the other side is side effects. Can you talk to those 2 points?
Well, I think it's true with any drug or any nutrient, the earlier you do it, the better the results. So most trials now are giving it in what we call pre-dementia or mild cognitive impairment. There's a little bit of improvement in early Alzheimer's. But what's really critical is that the side effects of this recent drug, lecanemab, are basically brain swelling and bleeding, okay? And they occurred in their trial in 1 in 5 people. Now, we don't yet know the cost of the drug. The previous drug had been pitched at $40,000. That's the treatment. But of course, if you've got brain swelling and bleeding occurring in 1 in 5, you've got to be monitoring people with brain scans. And that whole process, of course, adds additional cost. And on top of that, if there are problems that need to be solved, that adds additional cost. And that's all against the backdrop of something that might cost 10p a day. What are the side effects of giving omega-3 and B vitamins? And the answer is, less cardiovascular disease, better energy, better, I mean, it just goes on forever. So we're really looking at a crazy situation where it is so incredibly obvious that the way to go is not amyloid drugs, which have failed, in all respects. And yet, Big Pharma still is trying to push this one onto the health.
And that's all about money, control of the media, because David Smith's research, it got some headlines, but boy, has the lecanemab story got headlines. And I also see that it was an 18-month trial, may have been a large trial.
Mm-hmm.
Is the implication that you would be on it for a lifetime? Because obviously the cost to society, particularly if it runs through, for example, the UK's National Health Service, is hugely different if you take it for 18 months versus the rest of your life.
Well, of course. And also not only the cost, but I mean, do we really want to be putting elderly people who've got some level of dementia through these very toxic treatments and then doing brain scans and then dealing with the complications in 1 in 5? I mean, this is so important. If a nutrient produces adverse effects in 1 in 5, we're not talking mild adverse effects, we're talking brain swelling and bleeding, you know, it wouldn't even be on the table. So this is really a crazy situation. And in the UK, particularly, when one does a proper systematic review or meta-analysis, as the National Institute of Health did in the States by Bedun, and they attributed 22% of what we call the population attributable risk to raised homocysteine, lack of B vitamins, and 22% to a lack of seafood omega-3s. Or in China, the absolute best, which was done in 2020 by Professor Jintai Yu, who's a member of our scientific advisory board, as is Professor David Smith. And they showed that by far the highest level evidence of disease-modifying treatment was B vitamins to lower homocysteine. But meanwhile, in the UK, we seem to put all the emphasis on something called the Livingston Review or the Lancet Commission Review, which at every iteration has completely, it's meant to be a systematic review, so it's meant to look at all the evidence, it's completely ignored the B vitamins. And with each generation of this, Professor Smith has written and sent chapter and verse, very, very clear, randomized placebo-controlled trials. So for some reason or other, certainly in the UK, but in other countries as well to some extent, we are ignoring the two most simple things to do, which is lower your blood homocysteine by taking more B vitamins, particularly B12, which is often malabsorbable in the elderly, and also increase your intake of omega-3, particularly DHA. And the big breakthrough that's happening is suddenly we are realizing that these two are codependent. In other words, you can take all the omega-3 in the world, but if you have a raised homocysteine, it may not work. And similarly, you could get your homocysteine down with lots of B vitamins, but without omega-3, this doesn't work. And that's really a big breakthrough, because it means even what I'm telling you is underestimating the power of B vitamins and omega-3, which are cheap, non-patentable, not so profitable, but highly effective.
Absolutely. And also another example of the synergy of nutrients. Nutrients generally work as a symphony, take them all together. Patrick, absolutely great. Now, there's 2 other videos we're going to be linking you to. One is you're going to give us a presentation, and the other is your video from Food for the Brain that also includes the cognition test, so people can do an online test to determine if they're likely to you know, then have to test their homocysteine. Is that not right? Looking at cognitive decline.
No, you're absolutely right. And the film that is called How to Build Brain Cells shows something very, very obvious. And what I like to say is, if you give a builder a bag of nails, you get a house? No. If you give them a hammer, do you get a house? No. Give them a hammer and a bag of nails, and you do. And the point of this film, as you will see, is that the neuronal membrane through which all communication occurs has to bind something called phospholipids, which are very rich in eggs, to omega-3 DHA. And that binding is done by a process called methylation. Methylation depends on B vitamins. Watch the film, and it becomes completely obvious why you need both. And then, yes, I look forward to showing you the latest evidence linking the omega-3 B vitamin synergy. They are a dynamic duo.
Patrick, thank you so much. The links, you'll find the links to the other 2 videos here. Thank you so much, Patrick.
My pleasure.